Welcome to The Lubber's Hole, a Patrick O'Brien podcast. You're with Ian.
And with Mike.
And together we have been reading mostly the Aubrey-Maturin novels of Patrick O'Brien. But Mike, this week our journey's taking us to a different destination again from the Aubrey-Maturin canon. Remind us, please, would you? Where did we get to last time? And where are we headed to this week?
Oh, I'd be delighted to, Ian. Well, last week we explored the first of two Patrick O'Brien books that could be said to be prequels, or at least precursors, to the Aubrey-Maturin canon, The Golden Ocean. There was plenty to please an Aubrey-Maturin fan there, as O'Brien started exercising his nautical and historical fiction chops, something we dearly love. But this time, we're on to that second precursor, The Unknown Shore, a book that brings back some characters from the Golden Ocean. And like the first book, we're still riding along on Anson's famous journey, but this time from the viewpoint of the Wager, a ship that was lost fairly early on in the last book.
Right.
The two main characters, I believe, hold a great deal of promise for pleasing Aubrey-Maturin fans even more than the Golden Ocean.
Oh, that's a mouth-watering prospect, Mike. Let's get into it. Let's just say to the listeners that, unsurprisingly, since we're going to try and do this whole book in one episode, there are going to be some spoilers. If we get to any particular turning points in the chapter, we may take a moment and remind you one last time that we're about to reveal something. But basically, we're going to get all the way from the beginning of the book to the end. In a way, if you've read the Golden Ocean, then you know a little bit about what happens to some of the characters already. But anyhow, this is a different story. For O'Brien life context, you probably remember that Golden Ocean was written in 1953, published in 1956, and was at least partly aimed at a young adult readership. The Unknown Shore was a continuation of that idea, I think less targeted at young adults, more of a general readership, written in 1958. Interestingly, Mike, this was going to be Patrick O'Brien's last brush with the nautical Napoleonic Regency historical world for a decade. So let's see where he was at. Let's see where his second take at this famous story finally takes him.
Yeah, and I think we can't help but jump into this thinking we're reading about the Wager and not think about David Grann's recent book going to the big screen, and we're hoping, as some people have said, may make a bigger appetite or demonstrate to some folks in Hollywood and other places that there's an appetite for this. It looks like, from what we know, that O'Brien drew largely from John Byron, the Jack in this novel, a real person who we'll come back to later. His writings about his time on the Wager as a midshipman and everything that transpired. David Grann, on the other hand, in his Wager, uses multiple sources, really every account he can get his hands on. So, if people are comparing O'Brien's Wager to Grann's Wager, there are going to be some differences in characters and, what's said to happen and everything. But by all accounts, the historical timeline, pretty accurate through both books here. And a bit of a disclaimer, a disclosure, a very big thank you that it's been a crazy week and we wanted to get this out as quickly as we could. A writer who goes by the name of Spectioneer and calls him or herself a reader, would-be sailor, and writer in their WordPress blog has done kind of a chapter-by-chapter analysis of The Unknown Shore. We're going to post that out on your socials because we have taken some of that as a starting point for us here in our chapter-by-chapter breakdown. We have taken Spectioneer's kind of reactions, pulled them out. We've inserted our own. We put some of our own favorite quotes, a little bit of our own spin about reminders, how it goes back to the canon, and sometimes worked a little bit with the way we read it versus the way they summarized it and read it. But we owe a great deal of this episode to Spectioneer and send along our wonderful thanks. They appear to still be writing summaries of all the O'Brien novels. So you haven't seen Specksioneer before, in a few weeks, maybe missing a little bit of The Lover's Hole. There's another rich source to mine.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Specksioneer, wherever you are, if you're listening. We appreciate you giving us a leg up. So, Mike, let's get started with the opening of The Unknown Shore. And although we're going to get references to Golden Ocean and, you know, some of the characters and storyline in that other book, O'Brien doesn't start this book out assuming anything about the prior readership. He basically kicks it off in a whole new story. It's actually quite Jane Austen-like. We're in the company of two different families. It's almost like the beginning of Persuasion, right? With these two families kind of in parallel here. We have the Chaworths, who are a family of adequate fortune. They're Tories, they're landed gentry. The father of the family is a former military man, and he has children by the names of Anne, Charles, Sophia, Georgiana, and Dorma. They have a nephew as part of the household, one by the name of Jack Byron. That's the guy that we've been talking about. There's also Jack's sister, Isabella, who had grown up with them after the death of their mother, Lady Byron, and Mrs. Chaworth, who is in effect kind of stepmom to the two Byron kids, is carefully managing her husband. And there's a very nice bit of dry humor about their byplay between these two people. The other family that we meet in parallel is the Elwes family. Well, not the family, their singular neighbor, Mr. Elwes. And I think I'm pronouncing his name right. I've chosen the way that the surname of the famous American actor Cary Elwes is pronounced. So guessing here, is also wealthy, but shock horror, is a Whig and, to boot, an experimental philosopher. So it sounds a little bit like a mashup of Lord Cochrane and his father, the Earl of Dundonald, with the whole inventing crazy Whig kind of solitary genius thing. But anyhow, as part of one of his philosophical experiments, Mr. Elwes chosen to raise within his household as an experiment an infant by the name of Tobias. And he's raised Tobias. By the time the story gets started, Tobias is in his teens. He's raised Tobias to be a Spartan, to be a prodigious classic scholar, to be fluent in Greek and Latin, and also to be a scientist, a natural philosopher, an anatomist, and potentially a surgeon. And Mike, I wonder who this starts to remind us of here. We've already got a young Tory chap by the name of Jack, and now we've got another young chap who is a scholar, a Spartan, and a natural philosopher.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Ian. I couldn't help but get so excited as I'm going, wait a minute. These two are looking very, very familiar. And it continues. Toby, this prestigious scholar, as you said, that has been raised here, struggles with higher math, cares little about social graces, and is naive about the world, having never been out of his country home. So another guy who goes by the name of Maturin sounds a little bit like this, although he had been around the world a bit, which Toby is about to do. And Mrs. Chaworth adds that Toby has a strange power, in her words, with animals, both wild and domestic, is probably a horse witch, and is proficient at handling bees. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. All right, we used to have Master and Commander alerts, Russell Crowe alerts. I think we're going to have Aubrey-Maturin alerts all through this thing here. Yeah. And she, a little bit like Persuasion, is worried a bit about Georgiana's close friendship with Toby and his animals. Not really proper for a daughter they hope to marry off to Lord Carlisle. Well, Jack and Tobias, Toby's actual name here, they grow up together and they are the best of friends. And listen to this description from O'Brien. It was difficult to account for their friendship. Apart from their age, they had nothing at all in common, or at least nothing that appeared at first sight. Nothing could have been more different than their appearance, education, and family. Nothing could have been more unlike than their pursuits. But they were happy when they were together, and they missed one another very much when they were apart. Oh, this theme of friendship. Now we're back. Now we're back to the O'Brien. Well, Elwes decides to marry a wealthy widow with 7 daughters. And because of this, the indentured Tobias meets up with Jack and asks him to help run away to sea. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is the end of chapter 1. O'Brien, you had me at hello, at least hello in this first chapter. And I'm feeling really hopeful about the potential of these two characters. We're back on very familiar waters here.
Excellent. And it's funny, this is going to be a long book with lots of twists and turns. And I'm thinking I need to just, to use our favorite phrase, Mike, stick a pin in some of the home context here, because it's going to end up being important after many twists and turns for both Jack and Toby. And here's a little similarity actually backwards with the Golden Ocean. This book starts out with these two friends making a bit of a chaotic job of finding their way into their fortune at sea. They've more or less run away, kind of absconded. This doesn't really feel like an absconding as far as Jack is concerned.
No.
But Toby's really never been further than the kind of parish boundary. And off they go. They ride to London. Toby says to Jack, well, this widow, Mr. Elwes's new fiancée, wanted him gone, describes her as a termagant, a harsh-tempered, overbearing woman, and said that this woman had sent her servant to destroy all of Toby's animals. Mr. Elwes had meanwhile tried to have the lawyers dissolve the indenture that sort of established Toby's status in the household there. So he's kind of regarding himself as a free agent. Jack and Georgiana had tried unsuccessfully to get their cousin, the magistrate, to effectively free Toby. And finally, Jack had freed the songbirds that Toby had kept. Georgiana had promised to look after his bats, to give Toby the opportunity, basically, with a clear conscience, at least as far as his animals went, to run away with Jack. And here's another link back to the Golden Ocean. Jack says, oh, my friend Keppel, that's right, the guy from the Golden Ocean, the one who's going to become Admiral Augustus Keppel. My friend Keppel might help us get positions. He says, there's a really hot deal going. There's this fleet going around the world, and Commodore Anson is taking charge of it, and his flagship is the Centurion, and that's where we need to be. So, Mike, this is Patrick O'Brien. They're guaranteed a berth aboard the Centurion, right?
Right. Exactly. And we kind of pick up along the way, but just for context here, that Jack is in the Navy, has been in the Navy, has served as a midshipman on ships. And he was just sort of back home. That's why Toby was finding him, thinking, okay, I'm getting out of here. I know what, I got to meet Jack, and I'm going to see when he goes back on. Well, they head to London, and some of Toby's peculiarities start to surface along the way, more for us to know about. I think Jack knows about them. For one, he rides horses facing whatever way pleases him. So he might be, looking front, looking back, laying down, sitting up. We learned that Jack writes poetry. I think this is O'Brien's nod to John Byron's grandson, Byron the poet, who we'll see lots of in Aubrey-Maturin. And stopping at a familiar inn, Jack is embarrassed by Toby's list slippers. And O'Brien explains, actually almost as like O'Brien talking about why people might not know that these things are made out of old, worn out, unmatched curtains. And people who are really frugal, who does that sound like, don't throw them away. They craft them into these kind of ugly, unmatching slippers here. So he's embarrassed, but Toby says, gosh, I didn't think of anything else to bring. Matter of fact, I forgot to pack anything. But as they're going into this inn, which, who Jack knows and's been to many times before, Jack distracts the landlord right as he's about to comment on Toby's slippers. And O'Brien writes, men will go through fire and water for their friends. They will lend them money if there's no help for it. But to lead an exceedingly shabby friend who is known to have rather peculiar table manners into a grand place of public entertainment is little short of heroic. Above all, when the friend is shod with list slippers. Not many would do it. You may search all of Plutarch without finding a single case. So we're back in some classic writing chops here.
It really is good. Great. I love how no man in this that he ignore list slippers of his friend. Oh. So as well as giving us a bit of exposition about what list slippers are, we also get a bit of exposition about the world that we're about to jump into. Jack describes to Toby the world of the Navy and his excitement that this, in air quotes, secret mission, and of course it can't be all that secret because Jack, the country boy midshipman, knows all about it, how this secret mission to the New World is going to make them rich. And you get a very, very quick comparison of the outlook and the priorities of these two men. While Jack is describing the Navy and kind of duty and glory and prize money and riches, Toby is clearly not attending, because all of a sudden he jumps off his horse, jumps into the water, and we're reading this thinking, wait, hold on. What's this Toby kid doing? He jumps into the water and comes back with a bittern feather, explaining to Jack that he's always wanted to see one. And we already get a clue of what Toby / Stephen Maturin in the future is going to be like for always being distracted. However slow the pace of the journey ends up being, they're always willing to jump off a horse and look behind the hedgerow for a bittern or a vampire or whatever it's going to be.
I'm thinking, Ian, wait, did you see that hoopoe?
Yes.
we're right back with the two new friends in Master Commander.
But I think we get bitterns at some point. There's some nighttime assignation.
Oh, yeah, the classic, absolutely.
Yeah. So they're riding hard through driving rain. And we said before, it never rains without a reason. And guess what? These guys are going to get wet through quite a lot of this book, and not only at sea. They're riding hard through the rain, and Toby says, "Oh, I haven't packed anything." So Jack rides on without managing to put his coat on, and they're clearly completely unprepared. Luckily, Mrs. Chaworth, having a little bit of a sort of sympathetic twinge here, had packed some essential things, and even more sympathetically, Georgiana had added another pair of list slippers, tear-soaked, to one of the bundles that the boys are carrying. Toby even so suspects that his bag is empty, that he's got nothing other than the clothes on his back. And Jack is beginning to think of ways that they might finagle their way out of this lack of resources, this unpreparedness, and explains to Toby about interest, about the nature of politics and friendship and what you might call low-key corruption and how that might all work, and in particular how this guy Keppel might help them. How do people without interest get along, asks Toby with disarming naivete. Oh, they have to rely on merit, says Jack. Does that answer? Well, said Jack slowly, valor and virtue are very good things, I am sure, but I would be sorry to have to rely upon them alone, for my part.
Right. Jack come from a well-connected family, with a few pocket
dearly
boroughs.
Loves corruption.
Right. I love that. And I loved the scene in here as they're riding along. Jack's getting ready to put on his coat, when the rain starts, and then realizes Toby doesn't have one. So Jack rides without his. If my friend's getting wet, I'm getting wet. And I'm going, oh, God, I love this. Well, they get to London, and they're joined by Keppel and Ransom. Yes, Ransom. We remember him from Golden Ocean. Yeah. But they find out from Keppel that the extra midshipmen's positions on the Centurion have been given to a couple Irishmen. Yeah, the nasty, undeserving swabs. There you are, Fitzgerald and Palafox. But Keppel's father, who was working this out for him, being in the military and not knowing the difference between ships, which is very embarrassing to Keppel, has gotten Jack a position on the Wager. But Jack's delighted. Keppel and Jack are talking about this. Toby kind of strikes up a friendship with Ransom, and Ransom wants to carry him off to see the lions and animals at the Tower of London. The lions at the tower, says Tobias. Ha, the lions, eh, Jack? Which your friend ain't seen 'em, said Ransom. Would you come, says Tobias. Bah, say Jack and Keppel, who scorn the lions in the tower. So we're getting a little divide here amongst these guys. Keppel and Jack putting their heads together with all their interest in what's going on with the Navy. Ransom, just a good guy, as we saw in the Golden Ocean. And Tobias going, lions? Oh my gosh, lions? Yeah, what are we talking about the Navy for? Let's go see the lions.
Well, we're going to have to spend a bit of time in London exploring just how unworldly Tobias really is. So Jack carries on this conversation with Keppel, tells him about how this friend Toby has Republican ideals, and Ransom takes it upon himself to be the tour guide. Takes Toby on his first boat ride. It's clearly that Toby knows nothing at all about the sea or the river or boats or any of the words or language or customs. Never mind the fact that he doesn't know the city either. And there's this very odd kind of rambling little plot strand now about birds. He's looking for, Tobias, that is, Toby, is looking for a unique bird that he'd spotted just after the Tower of London. So Ransom heads back and leaves Toby to go and pursue this bird. And Toby gets himself completely lost. He ends up asking his way from some people who are at worst thieves and perhaps only slightly better than thieves. Gets himself into a pie house, also full of thieving types. Doesn't understand how money and coins work, puts a guinea on the counter and has to be paid in all of this small change, with people going, this guy is going to get killed if he gets out on the street here. The thieves follow him as he leaves the inn, and the innkeeper tries to warn him that my wife quite likes you. I hope the regulars don't cut your throat. I hope if they do, they're going to do it a decent distance from the inn, because he sees Toby as this poor wandering soul. So we haven't heard the last of the birds, but here we go. Tobias seems like he's just lost himself in the stews of London, and like, what's to become of him, Mike? We're going to learn about that in chapter 3.
Right. And don't we wish, Ian, that all the innkeeper and his wife's words had been out loud before Toby left? Unfortunately,
Right.
He tried to communicate those, right, with a significant wink, which I'm sure Toby didn't get, sadly. And I love O'Brien's significant wink. Right? Oh, so Toby's walked out. We're wondering, has he had his throat cut? We don't know. Neither does Jack. As chapter 3 opens, we learn that Jack's been searching London unsuccessfully for 3 days, and now he's sitting wondering what to do in Thacker's coffee house. He's hoping to see Tobias miraculously appear before him because the ship sails the next day. In walks Mr. Elliot, the wager surgeon, who's kind of looking around. He's hoping to meet a new surgeon's mate that he's going to interview over a coffee there. Elliot's chatting about meeting this guy and his stringent requirements for a surgeon's mate, somebody with a truly scientific cast of mind, he says, who has some Greek and Latin, a love for anatomy, and not the half-licked cubs, as he says, that the Navy's been trying to send him. Commodore Anson makes an appearance at the end, quickly walks out. So we're getting this cast of characters back from the Golden Ocean. And Mr. Elliot invites Jack to join him for a pot of chocolate. And I'm thinking, wait, we've got Jack, we've got a surgeon, a pot of chocolate at a coffee house, first meeting, reverse deja vu. No. Another one of our Aubrey-Maturin alerts here. We can just see Master and Commander spinning out here. And so Jack says, well, Mr. Elliot, I've got a friend who's disappeared, and he would be perfect. He's exactly like the man you were describing. And Elliot says, oh my gosh, I've got this brother-in-law on the board of examiners now, so I can get someone passed if only I can find the right candidate. Now, somebody else comes in. They tell Elliot that the guy he's waiting for has now declined. He has since gotten married and no longer wants to sail around the world. So Elliot turns to Jack and says, look, why don't you go to Bow Street, because somebody there can help find your friend and bring him to me as quickly as possible. And in the meantime, Elliot goes out to see what other mates are available via the Navy office.
Right. By the way, going to Bow Street, he kind of means asking the police to help, even though there wasn't really police in those times. But like Bow Street, the Bow Street runners were the kind of London forerunners of a police force. Anyhow, and I love this. Wow, I can't decide, Mike, whether I love or I'm puzzled by this next passage with their tactics for trying to run down Tobias. Let's lay it out for you here and see what you, the listeners, think. Outside now, there's a party of midshipmen arguing about what they call the prodigious strange birds that they've recently sighted on the monument. Now, the monument still exists in London. It's a Doric column, 160 foot tall, with a giant golden ball at the top, decorated with flames, and it commemorates the Great Fire of London back in the 17th century. So this is kind of where they've seen these weird birds, and this strikes Jack with an idea. He runs out, he bounces off an admiral, falls over Ransom's feet, and he has no idea where Toby might be, but has this inkling that these prodigious strange birds might bring Toby out to see them. So he's kind of thinking about setting philosophical bait for Tobias Barrow. And it's a funny story, and you've just got to kind of run with it. he gets Ransom to get hold of a couple of turkeys and hoist them at the top of the monument. And I have the strangest visions in my head of what this is going to look like. But anyhow, he says, Ransom, you take care of some turkeys. I'm going to go and see a former shipmate. And this is the guy who's in charge of the press gang. Hey, he says, the crowd coming to see the turkeys will draw plenty of pressable men, so there's a pressing opportunity to build our crew, which will get him in good odor with the fleet, as well as the chance to find my old buddy, Toby. So Jack offers a guinea for the man who manages to lure in Toby, and meanwhile, Ransom is the little kind of physical comedy of him getting the turkeys to the top of the tower is really funny. It's a stretch credibility-wise, Mike, but it was really, really funny. The whole thing reminded me a little bit of the Jack Aubrey in the insane asylum in Boston, just for the kind of sheer weirdness and delight of it.
Well, it's funny. Back on some of the original gunroom conversations about the unknown shore, a couple people said, I'm pretty sure that there's an actual story behind the birds hung at the top of the tower. And everybody's going, what? But then they said, well, O'Brien has always said that fiction is not nearly as fascinating as the truth in some of these. So I'll have to see, maybe if we can find a link back to that, if in fact it is true here. But like you say, the whole telling of the story and Ransom getting the turkeys is classic Patrick O'Brien humor. So a minor Aubrey-Maturin alert there. Well, and you know what? I forgot to paste in here the description that you listeners go back and take a look at it when Jack is telling Dick Perm, his old shipmate, and the rest of the press gang what to look for to spot Tobias. It is Stephen Maturin all over.
Yes.
I mean, it just sounds exactly like Stephen Maturin. So.
I think he even calls him meager, which is O'Brien's best descriptive word for Stephen Maturin.
Right, exactly. Well, Ransom's up there. The turkeys are hung. He's watching the crowd from the top of the tower, and he spots Tobias, but he's not dressed as Jack described him. He's in a sack, since these thieves, who thankfully did not cut his throat, have stolen all his clothes and all his money. Now, he doesn't have a belt, so he's literally holding the top of the sack up with, holes for his legs on the bottom. And O'Brien makes a comment in passing that he'd be happy to run around naked. And I'm thinking, Maturin. But to get through this around town and through this crowd, he's wearing his sack here. Now, as he runs into the crowd, all of these lookers on, kind of, a little higher in society perhaps, and just others, are offering opinions on the different rare bird species that they may well be. And Toby corrects him. He says, no, they're just common turkeys. And I thought to myself, was he talking about the birds or most of the crowd? and I think it might have been the crowd, because, Ryan tells us the crowd knocks him down for his impertinent opinions. And then someone screams, the press is coming. And everybody runs, including the now panicked Toby, who never would have been panicked before, but he's been mugged. And now he looks behind him, and there are these men with, are armed with swords. So he's like, okay, I'm not going through this again. But of course, they overtake him running in the sack, and they catch him and reunite him with Jack.
So hurrah for everybody at that point. And what a bizarre tale. Anyhow, we get into the end of the chapter. Toby is shoved aboard the Portsmouth coach with Mr. Elliot, so they're on their way to their rendezvous with the Wager. And later, riding on the top of the coach, Tobias gives the news to Jack that he's going to be the surgeon's mate on the Wager, even though the board, somewhat to Jack's surprise, had passed him to serve on a third rate. And he has this little misunderstanding for himself. Toby thinks, a third rate doesn't sound very impressive. But no, this is actually credit for your knowledge and your anatomical drawing skills. A third rate is a 74, Jack tells Toby. This is really a big deal. He says, glory is just round the corner.
Yeah.
And of course, he's not grasping a belaying pin. He's stealing the clothes of our man Sean from the Golden Ocean. I have a feeling that at the beginning of this long book, we're invited to hope for glory, but I'm not sure that's going to come quite so soon.
Right. It's funny. There are so many things that kind of remind us at the beginning of the Golden Ocean too with these two guys. Sorry, Ian, keep going there.
Yeah, sure. And Toby, meanwhile, goes to sleep. And I love the description of Toby's mindset as he gets to the end of this rather fraught day. He had lived through a very great deal in the course of that day. He had been hunted down by the press gang and taken, restored to his friends with surprising violence, clothed, examined by Mr. Elliot, examined by the surgeons, and provided with a warrant, a ship, a career, and the prospect of seeing creatures unknown to natural philosophers in the immediate future. So there's more than common turkeys awaiting him, we learn, if this all goes okay. He nods off so completely that Jack has to tie him to the luggage. And presumably he's still wearing the sack. I don't know. So he's still sleeping. In fact, when we finish the chapter with the sight of the Centurion, the Gloucester, the Seven, the Pearl, the Trial, and the Wager all riding at anchor at St. Helens below them.
Wow.
Whew, Mike. Quite the adventure there in chapter 3.
There is, and I'm remembering that little scene where Toby's telling him about his warrant. And Jack says, "Well, do you have it?" And Toby, he must be dressed now because he's got pockets, and he's digging around in all his pockets, like, "Oh my God, where is it?" And I'm thinking Aubrey-Maturin scene, but then Jack says, "Wait, maybe you gave it to Elliot." Jack hangs over the coach, knocks on the window, and Elliot and Jack are pantomiming this thing. It's just great O'Brien. Well. So despite this incredible rush, they get there, they're looking out over the squadron, and they quickly learn that it's not sailing any day soon here. Now, once Tobias agrees never to go out, at least on land, Jack stipulates, without Jack, they look around Portsmouth. And Jack shows Tobias what O'Brien describes as the vast fleet against Cartagena and the Spanish Main was fitting out as well as their own squadron. So we've got a lot of boats massing here as part of this war. What was it, the War of Jenkins' Ear that you had said last time? Yeah, good. Well, O'Brien paints this beautiful picture, which starts always, with a pure blue sky. And this one's got white clouds, a forest of masts, all these ships in the harbor here. And Jack is working hard. We've heard mentioned a couple of times earlier, one with August Keppelstad about Toby's Republican ideas here. Sounds like another surgeon in the making that we know. And Jack's trying to teach him, okay, we're not in Plato's Republic here. We're around our officers' naval discipline and everything. He's teaching him that. He buys him proper clothes, and then they head out to the Wager to report for duty. And Jack sort of stands in for Babington and Pullings in the Aubrey-Maturin novels. He's educating Tobias as the way they educated Stephen about the ships, about the officers, about naval custom. And as they're rowing out to the Wager, Jack just hates it when the waterman calls it the store ship. He's not, and even Toby kind of gets a feeling like, yeah, this one doesn't quite look like some of the others, but says, oh, gee, it's nice and wide. So as they're about to head onto the ship, Jack reminds Toby to be sure to use his right foot to board because that's luckier. And so we have check, Jack, superstitious, our Jack, check, superstitious. They meet some of the officers. Tobias is taken down to the cockpit, and on the way, he trips over a swab, hits his head hard on a cannon, and is told in phrases that are, of course, always meant for a landsman, "You've fallen down, you should take care, and look where you're going." And the purser, Hervey, meets the two of them, greets Tobias, but then quickly sucks up to Jack, saying, he kind of takes his elbow, walks him off and says, I had the honor of being known to your grandfather, another of the Lord's Byrons here. So, we get a little feel for who the purser is.
Right. And interestingly, we get the idea that Jack and Toby have landed in initially two slightly different social settings, right? Because Jack is already part of a famous family and has connections and has interest, as we've said, and Toby has none of it. And we notice that in the contrast of the attitude to everybody else to Toby. He goes on this long, twisting journey to the cockpit where he meets Mr. Elliot. There is a cabin there that Elliot has fashioned for Tobias because he's going to be the surgeon's mate. Tobias is very grateful. And by the way, it's I can't remember if it's made clear here or later in the book, that Elliot has really pushed it out. He's a surgeon who's really done great things in demanding and securing nice spaces for treatment of sick people and supplies and good facilities in air and ventilation and all this stuff. So he's another example of a proto-Maturin kind of attitude here. Tobias is grateful, and Elliot, feeling that he's all been a little bit too formal so far, offers Tobias the chance to have anything from the medicinal stores. And here's a kind of an anti-Stephen Maturin precursor. It says, in the course of a lifetime spent among drugs, he's talking here about Elliot, he had acquired a taste for many of them, a taste shared to some extent by Tobias and the Loblolly boy. And for a while they browsed among the tinctures, linctuses, and throches, mixing themselves small personal prescriptions, mandragora, opium, black hellebore. So Mr. Elliot says to Tobias, we're going to operate here. He's showing him to where they do surgical procedures. And Tobias notices a very fine trepan. And again, that's a nice precursor to some things that we're going to learn about in the Aubrey-Maturin canon. Oh, yes, says Mr. Elliot. The last time I used that was on the second lieutenant of the Sutherland, a very obstinate case of melancholy. I conceived that it would relieve him. Did it so, sir? He was a most ungrateful patient.
You made holes in my brain.
There's going to be a little kind of topsy-turvy thing about Elliot. He treats psychiatric disorders with surgery, and he treats physical ailments with mind games, as we're going to find out. So he's not the model of the kind of purely rational, scientific, physical gentleman that Maturin is. But anyhow.
Yeah. As we were going through this, Ian, I felt like we were back in Post Captain counting the number of times the word bear appears. There's so many similarities to the Aubrey-Maturin canon. So I will flag you and say, we are just pointing out some of them. And by all, you should read this and start keeping score and see if we've got an official score sheet somewhere here. It's great. Well, Elliot's been waiting on the bosun to put up the final piece of the privacy screen for Toby's cabin, this canvas that will kind of shield him a little bit. And then he decides, wait, I could use the trepan to bore holes in the wood. And the two of them get ready and act like they're going into, the surgical theater. They're operating here, and they get the holes in the wood. They've got the canvas up. They've got it tied down, and the bandages secured. And Elliot says, the time, and sounds like Jack firing cannons. Toby says, under 2 minutes. Also sounds like Stephen Maturin doing surgery himself. What was the time, right? And then O'Brien writes, speed is of vital importance to those who must operate without anesthesics.
No kidding.
If you don't have any anesthesia, let's get that surgery over with quick here. Thank you. Well, Elliot tells Toby the rest of the day is his, and to report abaft the foremast at 8 in the morning. And then he takes off. And Toby has no idea where that is. And he keeps repeating, abaft of the foremast. And he sits there, and he's sitting there kind of looking around. And despite, as you say, Ian, all that Elliot has done to make this so much nicer than any other doctor's quarters in any of the other ships of the squadron, or perhaps the fleet, Toby's still looking around, trying, says O'Brien, to reconcile his ideas of the healthiness of a seagoing life, unlimited fresh open air and light, with this appallingly fetid den in the darkness. But he's still thinking about he's lost, and he's afraid to ask too many stupid questions and embarrass Jack in front of his shipmates. Jack, why would you have brought this guy on board here?
Well, we get to switch then. Given the mention of Jack, we get to switch to Jack's point of view. He's been and found his own quarters, escorted there by the very obsequious guy. And he's actually done pretty well for quarters as well. He has an odd, long, thin space, says the text, squeezed between the wardroom bulkhead and the first lieutenant's cabin, much too valuable a space to be occupied by any midshipman, however gaudy his connections. It had a bunk of rather curious lines, excellently adapted for a triangular dwarf, 2 lockers, and just enough room to sling a hammock. It had no light or air, of course, but it represented a degree of comfort that Jack could not have looked for legitimately for years to come. So, happy times for Jack. He's got nice accommodations here. Both he and Toby seem to be doing okay. This is all very promising. And we get to meet the other midshipmen as well here. Cousins, who's the senior, who's a bit of a character. Campbell, in which character O'Brien indulges in his delight at lampooning the way the Scottish people talk. It says here, Campbell spoke broad Scotch at all times, although his remarks will be put down in English, for the representation of a dialect is tedious, inaccurate, and often incomprehensible. So O'Brien's already well into his habit of roasting Scottish people here.
I hadn't thought about this before, but there seem to be several instances. You pointed out a couple to me earlier, Ian, when we were talking. But this one, all of a sudden, it sounds like O'Brien is kind of, the character in the movie turning to speak to the audience again.
Yeah.
I don't remember any of that in Aubrey-Maturin, but I love it. I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah. So we have Cousins, we have Campbell, the Scottish guy, we have the quartermaster, Mr. Rose, and they're all getting to talk about the wager, how it's a converted Indiaman, it's not a proper fully crewed man of war like their old ship, hasn't got a proper crew. Rose is worried about what might happen with such a pack of odd characters and, partially qualified seamen aboard. Rose gets to show Jack around the ship. And finally, they get to bump into Toby, who's in a part of the hold that is about to be sealed up. And Toby had been confused about the directions. Like you said, Mike, very diffident about asking for help. All these places have multiple names. There's orlop and cockpit, and you didn't expect guns on the gun deck and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Guns on the gun deck, said the quartermaster with relish. He looked to find them there. Ho, ho, ho. So Toby is definitely in Maturin mode, completely bamboozled by the geography of the ship and the names that the sailors give to all these different places.
Yeah, I love this. And Rose is an old shipmate of Jack's. So Jack's known him on other ships. Rose, clearly a veteran who's been put aboard for his expertise. They carry some pretty incredible cargo here, like battering rams and stuff for assaults on Spanish towns. And they got Rose as the quartermaster because he knows just how to stow those. So I think Jack's probably also pretty happy that if we're going to find Toby in this state and with these, foibles, at least it's a dear friend who finds him with me here. Well, nice. Toby, meanwhile, is still thinking, he's never, as O'Brien writes, going to be able to make out this maze of ladders, dark recesses, and unlit passages. But we're quickly kind of 40 days ahead in a journey that O'Brien points out should have actually taken 12 days. But again, already we've got problems with the wind and the weather and the waves and, various things going on. And we find that not only is Toby doing better with all the ladders and directions and passages, his stomach has now come to an agreement, O'Brien tells us, with this strict, unvarying diet. He can find his daily station when the loblolly boy, beats the brass thing and calls out pills for all ills. And he's, as we join him here, grabbing a telescope and climbing to the foremast top to get the first glimpse of Madeira, which is really nice. Now, Jack has had, on the other hand, a very full, frustrating 40 days, essentially working day and night to try to help get this very undermanned crew with so many landsmen into shape. He's also been very worried about seeing Toby climbing into the tops and worried that he's going to go even higher. Now, Toby usually uses the lubber's hole. Welcome, Toby. Yay. And one night at dinner, Cousins kind of says, why in the world are you going through there? Why aren't you going up the futtock shrouds? And Toby, I love Toby's. He says, well, I'd be afraid to use the futtock shrouds. And so, good for you, Toby. We're a man after our own heart. So it's 25 October, 1740. And O'Brien writes that Toby is, quote, coming through the gate of ignominy, perhaps a new nickname for the podcast, is his term for the lubber's hole here. And Tobias had the infinite gratification of seeing a remote dark lowering on the rim of the sky, which was Madeira, the first milestone on their great journey to lands and seas unknown.
So the journey is afoot. Toby and Jack have got to where they needed to get to, and we are going to spend some time ashore in Funchal in Madeira. Again, a place where we visit in the Aubrey-Maturin canon. Chapter 5 opens in a tavern in Funchal with midshipmen having a good time and socializing, all except for Jack, who is dissatisfied. Now that he's had the chance to take stock of where he is, his captain, his ship, the boatswain, the purser, his fellow midshipmen are all sources of dissatisfaction to him. He learns, furthermore, that his captain is moving up, and Wager is getting Captain Murray moving over from the Trial, which is an unhappy ship, and he's wondering whether I'm going to get the blowback from this skipper who's made this other ship unhappy, and maybe that was all down to the captain. He can't, meanwhile, teach Toby to recognize rank. And I kind of wonder whether this is Toby being just innately anti-authoritarian and choosing not to see anybody's rank, or if it's just his naivete and ignorance. Either way, it's funny. Toby had asked Mr. Cheap, the former hard horse lieutenant of the Trial, who is now becoming the captain of the Trial, he asked Cheap to hold Toby's serpent, a snake, while he got into a boat to pull across to the Wager. And the angry Lieutenant Cheap had stormed off. Toby had asked then Commodore Anson, in very social, easygoing terms, hey, Cock, how about a ride as far as the Wager? Noting that even Anson seemed to be quite shy of the snake. He clearly knew that this was Anson that he was addressing, but he just didn't feel the need to show him any deference at all. And had also tried to recruit Anson into keeping account of the coordinates at which frigate birds are spotted on the journey south. And Toby's clearly still got some way to go in learning the discipline of the Navy. Jack is unhappy. And actually, Mike, I would say that this whole chapter continues with dissatisfaction. We have the drinking habits of Cousins in the midshipman's berth, his favorite line in Practical Jokes, including one that involves bashing Toby's head in with a heavy bucket of water propped up behind a door, which washes out Toby's anatomy sketches. Jack's dissatisfied with all the rogues aboard. Lots of the crew are from prisons. Again, similarly to how we've heard in other Patrick O'Brian books, the Wager had come last in the draft, if you like, of the pick of men for the squadron. Many of whom had actually been sent as pensioners, and I think this was a real feature of the crewing and manning of the ships in Anson's squadron in real life, was that they had lots of elderly guys who'd been paid off from the Navy were basically re-enlisted and sent out there to fill the numbers. The first lieutenant of the Wager is a quiet, reserved man, and Jack was more used to the fire-eating type. The gunner and the purser are quite cross-grained and argumentative, and to use our favourite phrase, stick a pin in that. The gunner believes that the gunner is a great navigator and the master is old and tired, so there's a bit of rivalry there. And the ship, as it turns out, as a sailing vessel, is heavy, awkward, sluggish, and to cap all of this dissatisfaction, he gets to disagree with Toby about the amount of their cabin that should be devoted to reptiles. So again, getting Maturin vibes from Toby here.
Right. Well, Toby, on the other hand, is pretty happy. He's happy at all the things he's learning from Elliot. He's fascinated and a little skeptical, but willing to give it a shot by Elliot's conviction that most ailments aboard the ship, including seasickness and scurvy, must be cured or at least treated using the patient's imagination. You had kind of pointed to this earlier, Ian, that he's going to drill skulls for psychological problems, but he's going to use like pretending to pull out a mouse or something to help you get over something. And they had this great discussion about salt in one patient. I loved it here. Well, Toby, unlike Jack, thinks the Wager is perfect. There's plenty of room. It has a better sick room than any of the rest of the squadron. And he likes this slow sailing, and he loves his patients.
So he's actually doing okay, bless him.
Right.
Well, speaking of slow, the new captain decides to put in a new watch system to help with the kind of elderly, less energetic features of the crew. He goes to a 3-watch system, which means that rather than one watch on, one watch off. You get one watch on and then 2 watches off. And the crew, even though this is easier for them, especially since some of them are either inexperienced or elderly, even if it is physically easier on them, they don't like change. This is a conservative thing about the Navy. Meanwhile, they have more regular gunnery practice. There's been poor firing in the first few exercises, and they're trying to get better. They're running very late in this season for getting safely around the Horn. And meanwhile, they're also expecting to meet up with heavily armed Spanish men of war along the way, which was a parallel conversation at this point, I guess, going on between Peter Palafox and Anson on the flagship about the identity and the destination of the Spanish fleet. And this is all really great O'Brien foreshadowing of encountering the Spanish Navy, of difficulties getting around the Horn, of the need to bring this crew together and make something out of the sort of dislikes and discontent that there is in the family aboard the Wager here. If you consider the history of the Wager herself and where she came from and what kind of ship she was, if you consider what you might have already read from reading books like David Grant's book about the Wager, none of this is going to be surprising.
Right. And it's funny, I'm just loving this book, and we're 5 chapters in, and I'm thinking, this is a huge story. The Wager was a big book. There's a lot to go on here. And I love all this deep characterization. It was one of the things I really missed in the Golden Ocean, but I'm going to myself, how is O'Brien going to have time to tell the Wager's tale in the remaining passages? Yeah. Well,
and by the way, how are 2 hardworking podcast guys going to manage to fit all of this in one episode without putting the listeners to sleep? That's going to be a challenge.
And our blessed listeners going, when are they going to get to the important part here? That says the important part, but it does go on. I think chapter 6 sets a great opening tone for us, though.
Right, Mike. And chapter 6 opens with a line that really sets the tone. Rather ghoulish. Blood in the scuppers, blood tinging the sea, blood all over the deck, blood everywhere, blood under the tropical sun. Which is one of those really great, long, descriptive non-sentences that O'Brien sometimes likes to write. And we sort of are wondering where all this is coming from. I'm starting to think of sharks and Mr. Hyribedian, but no, it's a bloodletting day. Elliot, with the help of Toby, has been opening the veins of everyone as the ship passes the Tropic of Cancer. And as O'Brien takes some delight in sharing with us, some of the men are okay with this. Some of them have got some false bravado and turn out actually to be nervous. Some of them are outright terrified and try and hide themselves. Jack is trying to be quite gung-ho, but even he has to turn his head away so he can't see the sight of all this blood because he's pretty close to gagging. So then already we see like Toby getting involved in Elliot's routine care, and also Elliot's quite particular and quite personal preferences when it comes to looking after his crew.
Right. And we get a little O'Brien description of some of the other ships. In particular, right now, he focuses on the Industry, one of the other hired store ships, a Vittler like the Anna. And he's telling us that it's a family concern. Most of the crew are related. Most of them are called George or William. They're Whigs, a Hanoverian sort. Yeah. There are no whizzes at math or navigation. We see some little funny things on their decks. And their captain's kind of slow. And their signalman seems to be completely inept. They break out, signals upside down, a flag at the moment saying with great emphasis, "We are taking gunpowder on board," when they're actually trying to signal the Commodore to say that, we think we fulfilled our agreed task and we're ready to take leave. So, grant us leave. And if you want to take anything, by all means do. Oh. Well, the Wager, like others, are going to send ships over quickly to get anything they want quickly on board before the Industry leaves.
Very good. So this is taken as an opportunity by some parts of the crew. And the next thing we hear about is that Jack observes that Midshipman Cousins is drunk. And this is because one of the boats bringing rum off from the Industry, just as Wager's new captain is about to arrive. This has been something that Cousins has been able to take advantage of. And they try to kind of cover for him. Jack takes Cousins off the boat and has Toby take him below. He jumps in the boat to take Cousins' work, which is all super generous of Jack. I mean, Cousins has been a bit of an ass so far, and Jack is willing to set that all aside and try and cover for him. But the new captain, Captain Murray, had noticed a midshipman fooling around, now sees Jack in the place of the midshipman and assumes that all of the capers and all the bad behavior were on Jack. So Cousins is downstairs, sheltered from all of this, and Jack has put himself in the position of taking the captain's wrath, and he's sent to the masthead. Now, this is a miscarriage of justice, and we know who's going to get upset by miscarriages of justice. It's our proto-Stephen Maturin. Toby, forgetting the advice from Jack that you should not speak until you're spoken to, goes over to have an angry word with one of the lieutenants, Lieutenant Bean. And this would have been mutiny if he hadn't been stopped by two midshipmen. They warn him that this is capital, right? That he'll hang if he goes ahead with this mutinous conduct. And again, there's a little bit of foreshadowing here that, you know, mutiny and death and punishment are never very far away in certain conditions of the Navy. As part of his efforts to right the wrong that he thinks that he sees rightly has been done to Jack, Toby very kindly attempts to carry his dinner up to him. Jack's missed dinner by dint of being up at the masthead here. And this is a big deal for Toby. He's got deep, deep-seated fear of going very high. So far, I think he might only have been to the top. He's got to get all the way to the masthead here. The ropes are getting narrower and narrower. He's never climbed up to this height before. And just as Jack, who is coming at the Aubrey by carving his initials on the masthead, just as Jack is doing that, he sees Toby below. The parcel of pork and biscuit, which was the dinner brought up by Toby, falls into the sea, snapped up by a shark. See, I was right to be thinking about sharks. And Jack is very, very gracious to welcome his friend up, say, never mind about the dinner, I'd lost my appetite anyway. Having seen the shark snapping up the meal, Jack thinks to himself that it could easily have been Toby that had fallen and got snapped up by the shark, and still could be with the way Toby is carrying on. So he brings him up to the masthead, and finally, when all hands are called to make sail, and as the opportunity arises, he slings Toby over to the preventer stay, slings him using belts, and sends him down, telling him to watch his speed. And this is an absolutely exhilarating ride for Toby, and he pledges, having experienced this, that he's going to climb much higher from now on. And the rest of the crew still have to suffer the consequences of this, because he comes into the foretop. It says, feet first, scattering unsuspecting occupants like ninepins. So it's a very nice little arc in this chapter. We had discontent and Jack feeling all out of place, and divisions and this injustice, but actually we're brought back to a happy place again by the unity and the friendship between Jack and Toby here.
Yeah. Well, they cross the equator, and we get the usual crossing the line ceremony that we picked up on from the Aubrey-Maturin thing. O'Brien says, with a licensed bedlam and violent horseplay, allowing someone to play Neptune at a seaweed beard, sousing the first timers, making them drink bilge water, covering them with tar. But the wager's making 10 knots, and he's got a true and steady wind, and Jack and Toby are dressed, according to O'Brien, in the simple elegance of calico drawers. They're sitting in the weather mainchains, being cooled by both breeze and flying spray, while Jack contemplates a satirical poem. And I love how O'Brien kind of keeps pointing ahead to Jack's, I think, going to be grandson, the poet Byron here. But things are looking a little bit better here.
Yeah, it's a bit more agreeable in the midshipman's berth. Campbell, the grouchy Scots colleague, has become friendly and communicative, and he sort of has some fellow feeling for anybody else who suffered under the practical jokes from Cousins. Campbell and Jack and Toby, therefore, have come to a bit of an understanding. And O'Brien, who's still on this sort of anti-Scottish sort of roasting thing here, would be inclined to blame Campbell's Scottish nationality for being disagreeable. And he describes how Scotland here is in an era when the country is seen as being dirty and poor, and its people being rude and grasping. But that, he says, on the flip side, the British, and particularly the English, were widely disdained by the Scots for being idle and soft. And Campbell himself was often, as we hear, offensively virtuous. And as it says also, laboured under a sense of grievance, which made him a tedious companion. And with all of this sort of slightly awkward social feeling with Campbell, Jack, to his credit, is still able to appreciate his valuable qualities, and they're getting along. And it's not only Campbell that we're seeing a new side of, right, Mike?
Right. Even Cousin seems to have some seaman-like virtue here, despite his pranks. Like his quick thinking that allows him to send a floating hen coop into the sea, like without snap judgment. When Moses Lewis, who's called Old Sponge by his friend, falls overboard. Now, unfortunately, the coop hits the poor guy on the head, pushes him further underwater, and he manages to impale himself on a barbed spear used to gig fish, his gig. But he is fished out, gasping and impaled, and Toby, manages to kind of do a little surgery on the gig and on him and stitches him back up. And while he's in the sick berth, it is explaining the presence of this remarkable scar on his back and tells the story of being shipwrecked, captured by the local inhabitants, enslaved, and ultimately gets to work on walls and gardens of Algiers. Now, his tale is painfully detailed. There's a talk of all the drunkenness during the shipwreck. And it ends with a bit of a comedy as the wives of one of the sultans proves to be the daughter of an English renegado who had kind of lost her Cockney-inspired English, but still you can kind of hear it ring there. And this scar, it seems, was doled out by an aggressive ostrich in the garden. Although we don't get that full tale because we're interrupted by a signal from the trial that she's in soundings. The water is now getting shallower. They're getting closer to Brazil. And Toby, listen to see if you hear any canon corollary. Toby is looking forward to the wildlife of Brazil, the jaguar, tapir, vampire bat, etc. And Jack tells Toby, no vampires or boa constrictors in the cabin. Clearly an Aubrey-Maturin word here, right? And then, but I kind of paused. There was this funny story that Old Sponge is telling. But, when I kind of get further in the book, as we'd say, stick a pin in that, I'm kind of looking back, and in classic O'Brien fashion, Lewis's story about getting shipwrecked, the crew getting drunk, coming ashore, being enslaved, does serve as a nice bit of foreshadowing mixed with some humor, as O'Brien often does.
It really does. And by the way, advice for Jack Byron: try as you like to set down the rule of law against vampires. It's probably not going to work for you.
That's right. Not now, not never.
So we've had nice weather in the tropics. We've had fun times and fellowship in the mess. The weather is going to start to put a bit of a crimp in all of this. The story skips 4 months ahead, and the ship is off the shoreline of Patagonia. That's the southern stretch of Argentina. This is a land, as the text says, of cold plains, rising one behind the other to the cold interior, unimaginable stretches of cold, dry stones, a vast, unending, silent emptiness. And Mike, this is, again, I think, a difference between this book and The Golden Ocean. He's got much more freedom with his description of the environment. And I think, again, this tells us that he's probably aiming this at a general adult readership, not so much a young readership, because he's really enjoying the poetry and the visualization of the physical world. And aboard the ship now, everything suddenly seems to be tense. Even the descriptions of the wildlife of Patagonia stress how all these wild beasts are in a state of watchfulness. There are pools of water where they try and refill their water, and the water's brackish. They go to dig up salt, which they're expecting to find just in kind of crystalline form on the ground here, but it's wet and it's all kind of gooey and has to be shoveled inside to drip dry. Nothing is quite as they would hope it to be. And the ships, and again, this was described as well in the Golden Ocean, the ships pause in St. Julian's Bay for a big refit, the squadron altogether. This had in fact been the stopover where Magellan and then Drake had chosen to hang their rebels, their mutineers, to kind of clean house prior to rounding the Horn or entering the Magellan Strait. And Mike, again, a little bit of foreshadowing there. Wise forebears have chosen to get rid of their awkward characters. Byron and the ship's crews of the squadron here don't take that precaution, and they carry on with the ship's crews they've got.
Right. Well, the ships are refitting because of the Atlantic storms, and the Pearl, which parted company in a storm a month ago, is the last to come in, bringing news that she'd lost her captain and had spotted the Spanish fleet. Now, the death of the Pearl's captain, means more unease because the Wager's captain now goes to the Pearl, and having gotten Murray last time, this time they get his former first lieutenant, Captain Cheap. Ooh. He who Toby has offended, he who has this reputation of being rough and savage and hard and driving and arrogant and cold. And the threats begin immediately here. Midshipman Morris is no seaman. Cheap has it in for him. He still has it in for Tobias. He's a Scot, which endears him a bit to Midshipman Campbell and to Hamilton, the senior Marine lieutenant. But everybody else does not care for this guy at all. And he seems to enjoy that. That's just fine. He doesn't want to be liked here. And this war of personality begins between the captain, the gunner, the carpenter, the purser. And there's this real kind of uneasy bit of politics aboard here. And it's very foreboding. And O'Brien, just in case we're missing it, paints the scene for us at the end of the chapter. As they're finally pulling up anchor, they put to sea across a bay dyed blood red by the presence of thousands of crimson shrimp. The sea is uneasy and kicking up enough so that water is coming through and it's getting into Toby's bed. And Jack tells him to never worry. And we know O'Brien, so of course, we are all worried.
Well, Mike, some people might experience a little pang there. You might have the appetite for a little something with a shrimp in it. You might want to go and take something to calm your level of worries as the ship's crew continue in the Southern Ocean. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back in a couple of minutes. So welcome back from the break. We've had so much foreboding about troubles and difficulties and weather and danger that it was bound to happen. And of course it does in chapter 9. We have storms and we have scurvy. The storms, the text says, the worst storms in the world are really taking their toll on the crew here. Toby has to do his sick berth rounds mostly by touch because there's not really any reliable light from the lantern. The hammocks are swinging so much that he's got to grope his way and feel what's going on with his patients. Toby and Dr. Elliot try an experiment growing cress and grain seed to keep the scurvy at bay, but the plants, just like the men in the crew, begin to die as they round the Horn. And they get a little bit hopeful as they come up to Straits Le Maire. The weather is okay. Straits Le Maire is a stretch of water between Tierra del Fuego, which is the big island on the southern end of Argentina, and Staten Island, which is the island kind of off the promontory there. They didn't take the Magellan Strait because it's uncharted and it's considered very dangerous. There would be no sea room within the channel, and sea room, as we're going to learn in this book, is going to be very important. So they go via the Straits Le Maire, and as soon as they leave there, the wind switches round to the southwest. The wind is plumb in their faces. The seas begin to build. The southern hemisphere autumn takes hold because, as we heard, they were late making their way south. There's ice, there's wind shrieking in the rigging, and huge, huge waves. And Mike, again, we said this in the Golden Ocean, O'Brien is really good at writing bad weather. And
right.
We get plenty of it in this chapter.
Yeah. And there's one of those rare calms, and Elliot goes over into the Gloucester to help operate on a mangled fourth lieutenant, but the weather kicks back in, and he never has the chance to return. The Severn and the Pearl are lost to sight, And then the rest of the squadron are later scattered by yet another storm near Cape Noir. And the Wager is left alone, O'Brien writes, in a black and lonely sea, so utterly alone and in such a sea that men doubted the reality of things and half suspected that they were already dead and condemned to a sailor's hell. Yeah. Well, you can imagine that after something like that, there's no good news. Yeah. And it's all bad news. There's every time there's something bad going on, Toby is noticing that there's an immediate increase in the death list. And he becomes more and more convinced that Elliot was on to something about diseases being impacted by the patient's imagination. Elliot had used the example of people who were done in with scurvy on a sail being sighted kind of miraculously coming back. Well, this is going the other way now.
Right.
And because so many people are dying or disabled, the able-bodied are working day and night. Even Toby is at the pumps. He's in the tops. So he's working just like a regular seaman here. No one has been the same, Toby thinks, since the Commodore has been lost to sight. The men are now far less biddable since losing the Commodore's example, an example that everyone respected here.
Right. And it's very ominous in this stage of the story. The connection between the different ships in the squadron is kind of dissolving here. They're no longer feeling the presence of Anson, and it's starting to feel more and more like each ship for itself. And no spoilers, we're going to get more and more a situation where it becomes each man for himself. In the Wager, they lose 4 men in the process of trying to save 1 sail. A 5th man is injured and is in no way to live. His life is in danger. Naval customs and habits and deference start to slip away. Jack is wearing this hairy Griogo suit, which, as the text says, makes him look not unlike a bear. Little Aubrey-Maturin signifier for us there. He's almost unrecognizable. The gunner is suffering even more from fear and self-importance and wounded vanity. So there's this unease and dissatisfaction and unhappiness in the crew. Everyone's in a state bordering on terror, but that only makes this guy, the gunner, louder, more talkative, and more convinced of his own worth as the real true leader aboard the ship. Captain Cheap tries to impose and demand respect, and he does that by being ferocious towards the men, by being reserved towards the officers, but he hasn't read the Jack Aubrey leadership textbooks. He's inconsistent, and he sort of sometimes encourages liberties and kind of easiness, which even a regular easygoing captain would not permit, but then on the other hand can be very, very ferocious on the other side of the cycle. He's also very ill, and Toby's starting to notice this. He's painfully ill in a way that makes him even more offensive. So, Mike, we've talked a lot about the family of the Navy, and the family aboard the Wager is showing signs of breaking up here, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. And as the state of the family is breaking up, things are getting worse and worse about where they are and where they're headed. They're repeatedly making this long reach south. They're tacking west when they can. And then they try to turn northward only to find that they've miscalculated either the strength of the current and where they are. They're still south of Tierra del Fuego. And people like the gunner and this weak-seeming First Lieutenant Bean began to tear at each other. The ship's company continues to disintegrate piece by piece, just like the rigging and the sails, with everything, kind of being blown away and washed away here. They round the Horn and continue northward up the coast, with the west winds blowing them on shore at every opportunity. And the men, of course, are terrified of a lee shore.
Yeah. And I can't remember when it comes in the book, Mike, if it's here or before or later, but Jack gives this very nice illustration to Toby of just what kind of bad news a lee shore is when, as the wind blows, you can sail less and less and less close to the wind. And you can, once you get between 2 headlands, you can be stuck. And all the way through this, my mind was going with the kind of very familiar O'Brien phrase, the impervious horror of a lee shore. And
right.
The terror of the lee shore here is very, very clear. And we're going to keep experiencing that terror for quite a lot of the rest of the book. So strap in. The captain Despite the fact that, as Jack says, it would be more comfortable with more sea room, the captain insists on keeping close in with the land, trying to make ground to the north following the coast, maximizing his chances, he hopes, of rendezvousing with the squadron and being ready for an attack on the town of Valdivia. And I think that's the same town as V for Valdivia, V and B being sort of interchangeable in Spanish. Valdivia is one of the places that show up in the Aubrey-Maturin stories. The gunner, remember, that's the guy who is grouchy and very convinced of his own leadership qualities. He's got some followers, and he and they together want the ship to sail west to the Juan Fernandez Islands, which, by the way, is a rendezvous that is going to appear in the real timeline, but later on. Captain Cheap, though, is adamant. He wants to stick with what he believes and says are his orders, but the crew and the officers don't know that the final orders from Anson were that the Juan Fernandez meeting should come after taking the town. So actually, the truth of what he's been ordered to do and the sequence of it isn't quite being made clear to the rest of the crew here. He doesn't share any of this with them. So Captain Cheap believes that men should be driven, not led. And he's the epitome of everything that is not Jack Aubrey, this guy Cheap. He's cold, he's distant, he's arrogant. He tends to listen only to kind of telltales to his favorites. Sailors fear and distrust him, which is very far from respecting him. And the gunner takes his own position here, trying to undermine the captain and showing just what an incompetent navigator he is. So we've got a fractious crew, an uncommunicative and divisive captain. It's not looking good here, Mike.
No. And interestingly, other captains had shared this final plan with their officers, and Jack had heard it from some of them. So Jack knows that, we're supposed to go to the town first, then Juan Fernandez, and he respects the captain for his determination. But unfortunately, the others who don't know that, just think he's being obstinate here. Well, Jack also knows that the wager holds the artillery that the other ships need to attack this town. So, of course, they've got to be there. If they're not there, the chances of them succeeding in taking the town are way down. And with all of Jack's respect to the captain, he does wish he would keep more of an offing. Jack, like everybody else, is thinking, we're just sailing a little too close to these lee shores. Now, as all this is going on, the weather and the scurvy continue to whittle down everybody, and the death toll mounts. And Tobias, meantime, diagnoses himself in the third stage of scurvy, one that, as far as he knows, and according to Elliot, nobody has ever recovered from. I was thinking, oh, man.
Yeah, it's getting dark. Ladies and gentlemen, strap in. It's going to get darker and darker.
Right.
The ship in this really terrible westerly storm is trying to claw its way northwards. They're driven onto, that's right, a lee shore. First time it happens, they manage to claw off, but the ship is caught too close to land. They don't have enough men to work her quickly and smoothly. Despite efforts by everybody remaining on board ship, they're driven onto the rocks, and the wager is wrecked. They work to get the boats off. They get the people ashore. This is all really hard to do in the sea. The mast and the yards of the wager are gone. Two of the boats, the barge and the yawl, manage to get ashore and are having a hard time getting back out to get the next set of survivors. Many of the sailors still on the hulk of the ship break into the rum stores and get drunk. And Mike, I'm getting kind of horrible feelings of Desolation Island and HMS Leopard here, not for the first and not for the last time. The captain's dislocated his shoulder. He's laid up. The few still functioning officers managed to get 117 sober men off the ship and onto the land with what few stores they can gather. The last sober man to get off the ship is the captain. And after he steps off, it settles into the rocks, and the wind and the sea continue bashing it to pieces. And Mike, we are now in a very, very different story from the Golden Ocean.
Right. Absolutely. And even Jack personally, he's getting ready to leave the ship. He's asking for Tobias. They're telling him he's gone ashore. So Jack goes with this final boat. But when he gets to shore on this somewhat sheltered bay, nobody's seen Tobias. And a number of them say, oh, I remember him heading aft, that he had some other patients outside the cockpit. And I believe he was going to try to get those sick men who were still waiting to go. That's the last we saw him. So Jack and 3 other men managed to pull the yawl out to the wreck, and they search for Toby. They find him, O'Brien writes, floating between decks, buoyed up by some jars that his arms still clasped. He was breathing, but only just. A hatch cover, dislodged by the beating of the ship, had struck him so cruelly that it scarcely seemed worth handing him down into a boat. But at any rate, said one of the men, passing him through the wrecked companionway, we shall be able to give him a Christian burial. And man, we get to the end of chapter 9, and I'm not kind of happy with the way this is going here. Wait, O'Brien, wait, I know this is reality, but I love you. It usually goes a little better than this, but this is the true story, even though Tobias is made up.
And it's funny, Mike, it's a big contrast. There was lightness and humor. Even with the human drama aboard the ship, there was, a kind of lightness to life, and there's darkness and danger and death here. And it's going to keep getting worse, for want of a better phrase. In chapter 10, Tobias, we are relieved to find out, has survived this injury and getting finally rescued from the hull of the Wager. He wakes having been in a coma for several weeks. And by the way, I'm going to say later on, I had some sort of reservations about parts of the way the story is told. Much of it I really loved, and it's super absorbing. I had some reservations about. One of the things that I did like is the way that we skip forward in time here, and we get to hear some of the grimness of what's happened in reported speech by Toby. And I feel like it cites it really well in the story, and I find it more I guess easier to read because it is really, really grim. So Jack is telling the story to Toby here of what's happened while he's been out in a coma. Out of the 147 men rescued from the wreck, only 90 still survive. So we're down to less than half the original ship's company. They are on a smallish island in 48 degrees south. So 48 degrees south is still pretty far south. We have the roaring 40s and the screaming 50s, so we're kind of verging on the 50s here. So the weather's terrible. Not quite as severe as Cape Horn, but it's still really forbidding. The crew, surprise, surprise, has fractured. There's a small camp of out-and-out deserters who said, captain's authority doesn't hold, we're off over here. There's the main camp where the gunner actually seems to be calling the shots. And rather than bringing regular stores, the gunner and his cronies have actually brought together as much rum as they can, and they dole it out in return for favors to their friends. So we're already, therefore, really, really short of food. Meals for the crew are consisting of sometimes dog, sometimes seaweed fried in tallow, sometimes the occasional bird, mussels and limpets, a sort of flour and water paste using flour rescued from the ship that's been cooked on a hot shovel, and they get to call it bread. It's really horrible survival story stuff, this. The Wager had actually been loaded with trade goods, none of which you can eat. So everybody's got a nice tent. Jack's got a tent made of bolts of blue serge. And from time to time, they're using the yawl to run over to the ship in good weather and poke about with boat hooks, trying to get out barrels of biscuit or knives or fishing gear or even whole barrels of beef. But the pickings are really thin, and hunger is beginning to haunt them. And also the stores are running out.
Time and time through this story, we see that, these guys are their own worst enemies. And it happens again. They actually have some Indians stop by and they're trading with them. And these Indians are really good natured. And then they come back and they bring lots of friends. They bring food. But that night, some of the men get drunk and start hitting on the women. Well, when they wake up, all the Indians are gone and they never come back. Now, another group of Indians stops by, but they're far less friendly and not nearly as biddable. Jack's telling Toby still, kind of about what's happening and what's going on. And he's saying about how the men are so divided that they have these plans, but with all these divisions, very little gets done. He doesn't know if the captain can command the men anymore. People have left. The captain tried ordering 600 lashes to people who were caught breaking into the stores. Toby's kind of completely incensed with that. Jack's saying, well, if we were home, they'd get hung. And Jack's saying nobody disobeys the captain to his face, But Jack's really afraid that this is not going to last. We're going to have open disobedience unless we can get back to sea. He thinks back on sea, a little bit of the captain's natural order will be restored.
Right. And each of the factions that Jack is describing here has got its sort of own imperfections and weaknesses. The captain is really supported by the purser. The purser has at least got some of the remaining liquor now under lock and key and is rationing it. Once Toby himself recovered is up and about, he gets to see when one of the purser's men sets down an empty mug in front of another man and declares that this purser has stopped his allowance for an unspecified reason. So we got this kind of favoritism and withholding of favors even in the captain's camp. Cousins decides to confront the purser about it and then stomps off. And a short while later, they all learn that the captain has shot Cousins for mutiny.
Whoa.
So already we've got breakdown and we've got death and we've got, either punishment or murder, depending on how you look at it, even within one part of the crew. Now, the gunner, on the other hand, has got his own little coterie of friends and followers, and the text tells us some more about him here. The gunner was not a very intelligent man, but fear of the northward journey and hatred for Captain Sheep lent him powers that he would not otherwise have possessed. So actually the fact that they're divided from each other is actually giving power to this rather kind of divisive and unpleasant individual. The captain is insisting on going northward up this really, really terrible coast because that's where the rendezvous is that's in his orders. The gunner and his followers want to bear away south and west, back round to calmer waters and to Juan Fernandez. The habits of the service, says the text, clung hard. The word mutiny still had a dreadful ring, and the shadow of the English gallows stretched out half across the world. And by the way, that's a very true statement, because a lot of what happened in the aftermath of this story was people covering themselves against possible charges of mutiny arising from the events that are going on right here. So the crew are at odds with each other. Propositions are being brought forward to the captain's clerk, and those are being kind of argued or put down or even debated. Cousin's death has killed all the affection that the hands ever had, and that wasn't very much for Captain Sheep, has taken away nearly all their loyalty, so the gunner seems to be winning the day here.
Yeah, there's this plan to leave the island. And all of a sudden, it looks like maybe we're kind of getting back together again. Work's finally finished. The longboat's being turned into a schooner. It's lengthened. And they still have the ship's cutter and the captain's barge. Enough boats for everyone. And despite all the former wrangling and posturing, the boats are made ready. And the plan is announced. And the men go aboard. Captain Cheap is said to be under arrest. We have this in kind of quote that he's going to be brought aboard by a file of Marines. So as the sails fill, Jack's on deck here and he's pleased and relieved to be back at sea again, believing that, sea's going to cure all ills. The captain will be back with us. At least he's here with us. And he looks back as they're leaving to the bottom of the bay, and there standing on the shore, he sees the captain and Mr. Hamilton of the Marines marooned.
Ooh.
Whoa.
So the first of many divisions has opened up, or the first attempt, if you like, at the parties setting apart from each other has come to pass here, and they've abandoned the captain and the captain of Marines. And Jack, as we open chapter 11, is still aware. I mean, I think he's got no affection or regard for Cheap at all. But he says to himself, this will never do. Those that might have protested against leaving the captain behind have been maneuvered aboard before the others and sent below. And Jack is, you might say, therefore, probably the only person on deck and aware of the situation who's feeling like, perhaps we made a mistake by leaving the captain behind here, by abandoning him. There's cursing, there's blame laying. Interestingly, Jack ends up calling attention to himself by failing to let go of the foresheet, which catches the wind wrong, and then ends up getting shredded. It's funny, Mike, as the text was written there, it occurred to me that maybe this was a Jack Aubrey ruse. Maybe he had deliberately put himself in the way of a sailing mistake in order to get himself basically turned out of the boat and sent back ashore. So Jack is getting blamed, I suspect deliberately, or rather at his own behest for this, but it's William Rose, the quartermaster, who says, we've got to put somebody back in the barge, go back and retrieve the spare canvas, which had been left behind, shouldn't have been left behind in the first place. So this is giving Jack the opportunity of being the one that goes back ostensibly to get the spare canvas. I don't think it's particularly a theme, but I can think of at least 3 or 4 cases in this story already, and a couple more to come, where people have left things behind. So this time they'd left the captain behind and they'd left the spare canvas behind. So this is the chance for the mutiny story perhaps to keep spinning here.
Yeah.
There's a great quote in the text here. The mutiny of the Wager may have started as a quarterdeck mutiny or something very like it, but it was fast growing to resemble one of the ordinary or anarchical kind. Every man thought himself as good as the next, and as none of the leading figures had the gift of command, everything was decided in a very democratic, very parliamentary fashion, admirably adapted to keeping the schooner in one place forever.
Nice.
And that, again, sounds like a Jack Aubrey lesson here. There are all these arguments breaking out. Some of the more argumentative men go off fishing now that they're back ashore. Jack gathers Tobias up. He steps into the barge. With them are Rose and Noble, Plasto, the captain's steward. Harvey, the purser, declines. More men join. Campbell, the Scottish midshipman, last of all. And as they pull out of musket range, Jack takes stock, and the rest of them, along with Jack, return finally to Captain Cheap.
Yeah. I love it that Jack's saying, I believe we're all of one mind here, gentlemen, and it's fascinating. So they're pulling back up. There's Cheap on the shore. Hamilton's on the shore, and Cheap doesn't want to look like he's been waiting and hoping. But when Campbell, goes up to report for duty, he shakes Campbell's hand. It's clear that, I think he's very glad that this has happened. And at first he wasn't sure what was about to happen. They're coming to do me in. What's going on here? But he goes down to speak to the men, and he starts well. But as he carries on, he kind of fills up with his own importance, and he finishes, as O'Brien writes, with all the condescension of a post captain addressing mere mortals. Well, Cheap does invite Jack and Toby for dinner along with Mr. Hamilton, and he impresses on them the need for very short rations, saying, now he's going to keep everything he needs for himself, but the men, if they're working and doing their duty, they really don't need very much. You can get by. And so the rest is going to be rationed out to everyone else. And, I want you to know that too, because you're on the rationing as well. And walking back with Toby, Jack says, it is a great pity. And they're bowed down under this icy rain through this silent village going to their hut. He said, it is a great pity. It is the world's pity that people who are in the right are so often disagreeable, and that it is impossible to like them. And it's like, oh my God, yes. Could all of our leaders, managers, politicians, please listen to this?
Yes. Well, Jack is playing the role now, despite his dislike for the captain, of helping to keep the crew together. He brings back even the original deserters, the ones who went off very early, and he goes to where the gunner and his followers are to see if they might give back a rightful share of the common provisions that are being held by the gunner's little mob. Of course, they decline. And he tells Toby, well, they might have given us our share if most of the decent men had not been away fishing. So, again, dealing with the exigencies of survival is kind of causing the cohesion of the crew to break down here. It feels really dark and grim and unremitting, and that's exactly what it's been so far. So they eventually recruit their stores enough to make it worth their while to try once again to leave the island. Just as before, we've got the captain wanting to go north to the closest Spanish settlement on the island of Chiloé, but he has got no idea what the coast is going to be like, and he allocates the men. He says 12 in the barge, 8 in the yawl. They managed to leave their original island, which has now been named Wager Island. The favourable wind that they have at the outset doesn't last for long. They need a wind from the south, and what they get is a west wind sending their boats, as the text says, tearing through a roaring desert of water, more appalling than they had ever seen. And by the way, Mike, they've already seen some pretty appalling seas and storms, and it's worse here. They dump their stores overboard. Another HMS Leopard moment here. They dump their stores overboard to lighten the boats, and they finally make it into a sheltered bay behind high cliffs. There's no place to land. They're in this kind of hollowed-out crater-type bay with steep rocky sides. No food, no fuel, and no way out, but a climb of 200 or 300 feet up the sheer rock. And they are really, really stuck here.
Wow. Well, 2 days later, they find a large island with big trees, and at least they get the benefit of a bonfire for a night, even though there's really nothing much to cook over that fire. And so it goes, as they move northward, endless ins and outs of coves and bays, no evident or clear passage north, endless toil, and nothing to eat except Jack's sealskin shoes, which he shares with Toby, of course. Eventually, they do find some seals to eat, still moving, tortuously northward. There's breakers and rocky shores, men dying on the sea, men dying on the land. They're always trying to find a place to leave the boats and attempt to hunt. And at one point, Jack and Tobias are out. They throw them a roasted seal's liver, and it makes them very, very sick. And finally, in this strong water, they're out there with the yawl, it's destroyed, and they're left with a terrible decision. They've now only got the barge, which seats 15 men, but they've got 19 people in their group. And 4 Marines are left behind with provisions and some weapons in what clearly appears to be a death sentence. And I was really moved. Yeah. The Marines, I can't remember their exact words, but they're waving them off at the beach saying, kind of God save the king or something. And it's pretty clear. That's it, guys. Sorry. Yeah. Wow.
It's horrible. Yet another attempt then with the boat to get around that same rocky cape that's been holding them back with the same contrary winds. They encounter this really strong tidal rip that they can't get across. And more really great description in the text here. They pushed on through it. Many of them were so wretched now that they did not mind what happened. They had been chilled and starved and soaked too long, and they felt that there was no blessing on them because they had left their shipmates behind in such a country and under such a sky. And Mike, it's a really great passage to pick on. There are many passages like that in these chapters, right. And many places where either collectively or individually they're thinking, well, we're pretty much at the end now, and it's hardly worth going on. That it's just such a tale of endurance. It's really, really, really striking, almost hard to read. There are days when the wind and tide heave them in towards the cliffs. They do finally get turned around and eventually make it back to where they'd left the Marines, and there's no sign of them. And then finally, Captain Sheep says, we're never going to get round that cape. We must go back to Wager Island. At least we have some shelter there. So all of this work, all of this suffering, the sacrifice of the Marines, all of the endurance, and they're back where they started. End of chapter 11.
Right. Well, chapter 12 opens back on Wager Island. It's 2 months later, and things are even worse when they were there. It's winter, so everything green is dead. They had pretty much fished out the place, so there's no fish, and there's really very little prospect of surviving the winter. Constant rain and storms beating down upon them, and they start talking about drawing lots. Nobody says cannibalism, but they all know what they're talking about here. Hamilton finds some pieces of salt beef washed on shore from a recently stoved-in cask. So it's not great stuff, but it is still edible. And Jack and Toby all of a sudden have this intense liking for Hamilton. They just really respect him because he could have very well hidden the food for himself. And as you pointed out, Ian, it really has kind of gotten to that point generally, every man for himself here. And so many men are that, and they're thinking, Hamilton did this. And I just love the way O'Brien writes that. Hamilton's very gracious, formal offer of beef to each person, each of their elegant thank yous and bows and legs in the midst of everything they've been through. But finally, the beef runs out. Men die, and then they get another visitor.
Right. So we have another encounter now with the local people. No one's sure why it was that they'd come all this way south, but the castaways are overjoyed, even so, to see this small band of Indians. There's a sort of a headman. He's described as being a cacique, a tribal sub-chief coming from the Konos archipelago. He's going to be a character for a little while here. The text says, he was a thin, middle-aged man with yellow, small eyes as shallow as an ape's, set close together and in the same plane on each side of a thin, jutting-out nose. And I'm pretty sure we're meant straight away not to like the cacique. He's pretty small comfort. He really only has a small party of Indians with him, but as we learn, because he speaks a little bit of sort of Spanish-ish, he does have some connections with the larger presence of Spain in Chile, meaning further north, and therefore he is a possible savior. With him as their guide, they set out going north. They make it to a small bay where the cacique's woman and child have been waiting. And next day they get to row along the coast and into a small bay that they had crossed previously without exploring. This bay has a river which they attempt to row up against the current. They're unsuccessful, and they have to run down to the sea again. And Mike, this is yet another, attempt at moving on and defeat by the conditions and kind of back where they started. It's really, really disheartening.
Yeah. So as all this is going on, the Indians are treating the regular seamen like slaves. They only share food with the captain, and the captain will not share it with any of his men. He hoards a supply with kind of manic suspicion, talking to himself. And he's also, I think, very judiciously thinking, they've met with the Spanish, and whether it's their culture or the Spanish culture, they only respect the top person. Yeah. And if I, make the crew seem like also they might not. So any event, Jack finally, though, gets up the nerve to tell the captain that the men will not be driven any longer. These guys are starving. They're being beaten. They're being told to row and row and row. When the captain doesn't touch a paddle, the cacique doesn't touch a paddle. And when Jack tells him this, the captain just sits there and twirls his beard and kind of mutters to himself, but finally says, "You mean well, Mr. Byron. I hear what you say." And I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah. Authority is important in the native society, just as it is in the Navy, and it's eating up the captain, and it probably has already partly eaten up the cacique, I think, as a character. But anyway.
Yeah. You could hear Stephen Maturin doing a complete analysis on this and authority here, right? Well, after the failure to go upriver, the cacique and his family take a trip southerly to go seal hunting. They leave one Indian, actually, I think it was his slave, with the exhausted and starving Englishman. And when Jack, Toby, Campbell, and Hamilton leave the encampment to go kind of scrape around looking for something to eat, the former deserters are seen pulling fast from the shore, taking the Indian with him. So the redeemed mutineers have mutinied again. These deserters that they had brought back in and fed have said, we're taking the Indian. We're getting out of here to find something else. Toby says, "It is a comfort to reflect that we have nothing left to lose, that we are in the lowest possible condition, that nothing can be worse." And we can imagine Jack Aubrey's reaction to this. And I think Jack Byron's is not unlike it. "No doubt," said Jack uneasily. "What you say is very moral, Toby, and uncommon philosophic. But I wish you would not make such damned unlucky remarks. I can think of a half a dozen ways in which we could be worse off."
Wow. And there's 2.5 chapters left, and O'Brien is going to prove that it's possible to be worse off.
Let me show you.
So the cacique, this headman, returns. He's convinced that the Englishmen now before him have in fact murdered the Indian who's actually headed off now with the mutineers. Eventually, Jack and the captain are taken in the cacique's canoe and they paddle northwards. So we've gone from the wager to ship's boats to smaller ship's boats to a native canoe. And they leave Toby and the rest to wait for another party of Indians. The next landing is an encampment now with 2 Indian huts. The cacique takes the captain into one of them as having status and rank, and Jack is left outside in the darkness, shivering with cold and exhaustion. He, desperate for some kind of shelter and some kind of food, enters another wigwam and finds himself sitting with two women sitting by the dying fire. And part of my brain went, oh, hello, women, warm, dry. But no, it's not going to be one of those encounters. The women quickly leave, and Jack sits by the fire while he can. They come back, though, in a few moments later. And I love this description, and I love this little encounter between Jack and the two women. It occurred to Jack that the sight of a face with amusement on it, rather than anxiety, hostility, or wolfish starvation, was almost as good as a meal. And I'm like, it's a relief for Jack. I've got to say, it's a relief for us as readers as well. They smile at each other. One of the women goes and fetches more wood. And Jack, it says, pointed earnestly to his mouth and rubbed his stomach, and in return was rewarded with some food and some more kindness from these women. They feed him, they make him a bed, they cover him up with cloaks. He thinks, if only Tobias had been here, equally well fed, Jack would have asked for little more. And as his way of entertaining them, he recites verse to them. Of course, it's verse that they can't understand, but he is a poet, and he tries to express his thanks to them as best he can.
Yeah. And I love how O'Brien said that Jack had to first check in and make sure that his pride didn't make him object. And I'm thinking, God, I wish Jack and Stephen had done that a little more often in the canon here. So well done, young Jack. I guess when you're starving, it makes it different here. Yeah. Well, days later, Jack's been there with the women. They've been fishing with these dogs. That's a fabulous description there. Jack's being fed and cared for, and his civility is kind of returning. And Jack realizes, the text says, after a few months of starvation, one begins to understand that one is primarily a walking stomach, and that the satisfaction of its needs is the great and fundamental pleasure of the world. When you boil us all down here. Well, it says, when the chief and the men returned, all gaiety left the encampment. The children and dogs retired to a certain distance, and the women came forward with anxious, downcast expressions and dutiful greetings. And boy, I'm not happy at this. I'm not liking this. It turns out that Jack's friends are the chief's property. One of them says something that displeases him, and he throws her down repeatedly, jumps on her, and beats her, snorting like a beast. And
this is really, really brutal. It's not the only, it's certainly not even the worst incident of brutality, but it is really brutal. And we get Jack's response to it. If Jack had been a hero of easy fiction, he would have knocked the fellow down. But being no more than a half-grown mortal, still weak with starvation and exposure, and unarmed in an armed camp of the chief's own relatives, he turned away, his heart filled with impotent hatred. Hatred not only for the chief, but for all bullying and domineering, and for the whole brutish tradition, whereby men, in order to show how manly they can be, affect to despise all pleasantness, kind merriment, and civility, and concentrate upon being tough, as inhuman as possible, with the result that their lives are nasty, short, and brutish, wholly selfish and devoid of joy. And not only their lives, but the lives of all around them, particularly the weaker sort. I'm like, I love this sort of speech. It's not a speech, but it's sort of inward reflection of Jack's. You get very, very strongly O'Brien's disgust for bullying and for misplaced authority, especially towards weaker members of society. He's even gone to a particular quote that is one of O'Brien's favorites, right? This nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah. From Thomas Hobbes's argument in his book Leviathan, that life outside of civil society would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, interestingly, I think O'Brien's doing so many things with it here. Yeah. He's kind of saying, some people could say, look at the Indians here. Hobbes is right. And by the way, Hobbes is making the argument, 100 or so or more years before this. That's why you need a sovereign, because you have to have civilization and rules, because people are animals and stuff like that left to their own devices. But while we're seeing a lot of that, we're also seeing Jack reflect that even in civilization, men do this a lot. Not that everybody does this a lot, but anyway. And I love Ian in this thing, in case we were wondering, is this a child's book? Is this your regular kind of adventure story that O'Brien's saying? He's basically pointing out to us again, breaking that fourth wall, that these writings are not easy fiction.
No.
Had Jack been a hero of easy fiction, tell you this book is not easy fiction. So you YA publishers, just in case you weren't looking, just so you know here. Yeah, this is real literature. Well, they stay there for several weeks, all of them, waiting while the Indians are fishing. And eventually Toby arrives, and Jack tells him of the friendly women who, as the text says, contrived to pass some victuals out through the back of their hut. Regretfully, the women leave, and then the larger party of Indians with the Englishmen in tow follow them northwards. In a small bay with a swampy river, the Indians stop, take the canoes apart, these skins and these poles, and they begin a long portage. Toby and Hamilton are carrying a disassembled canoe, and they're ahead with the captain. Jack is struggling to keep up because he's been given the captain's entire spare canvas and the captain's entire hoard of seal meat. So he's really weighted down, and in the past 3 days, all he's had are some yellow bitter roots to eat. So he is pretty starving, really not able to keep up, terrified of being left behind. He tries to kind of take a shortcut across a mud bog to catch back up and sinks into what appears to be quicksand. And he's barely saved via a tree trunk that's down below, which turns under his bleeding feet. So he's getting all these splinters in his feet. The text says, in a moment, he was in the slow, struggling wildly with his head under the surface, pressed down by his burden. So he's really under. He kind of reaches out, grabs a limb, and he's now kind of reached the limits of his endurance. He's struggling wildly on this limb, finally getting himself out of the bog. It says he sat, bowed right down, and indulged in the weakness of despair.
And a real low point for Jack. And you kind of wonder, where is he going to go from here? He hides his burdens in a cache in a tree. And when he finally catches up with the others, the first thing out of the captain's mouth is, where is my canvas and where is my meat? And he wants Jack to go get them immediately. And the answer to the question, where does Jack go next? The answer is his friend helps him out. Toby picks him up, says, let's go. He first of all takes the splinters out of Jack's feet. Off they go back together to search for this cache of canvas and meat for Captain Cheap. And we, I guess, like Toby and Jack, are thinking all kinds of bad words about Captain Cheap at this point. But we're also thinking all kinds of great words about Toby and Jack and their friendship. There's a bit of comic POB style relief when Toby casually mentions, oh, there's a puma on the other side of this little kind of slough, this little kind of creek here. And Jack waits carefully while Toby walks across the shallower mud. It says, vanishes into the bushes, and then returned with a pleased look on his pale, thin face. And Jack says, I believe you would creep out of your grave to look at a flaming bird. And Toby is genuinely a bit incensed by this. A puma is something worth stopping to look at. He says, it is not a bird, it is a kind of a cat. You may see it soon. It is moving along with us on the right. And Jack still doesn't know what is a puma. He gets this really loud roar. And Toby says, well, can you see? It's not a bird. How big, says Jack? Oh, the size of an indifferent lion. And Toby assures him very, very calmly, it's quite likely not a froward puma. And besides being Maturin to a T, it's great how he just kind of calms his friend down. That's a puma, like a lion, but probably not going to eat us.
Right. Well, they come back from this. We've had that let down with a little bit of this humor. And they get back. The others are gathered on the edge of a large lake, and they're putting off in canoes. And there's just enough time for Captain Sheep to grab his canvas and his seal meat, and they push off, telling Jack and Toby, there's no room for you. Other Indians will come back. And the chapter ends with the line, they stood there silent on the bank. No shouting would bring back the boats, and they watched them over the water until they disappeared in the darkness and the rain. And I'm thinking, how many times can you pick yourself back up? Right. And all this. Oh my gosh.
And chapter 13 opens straight away. Maybe as a reader, you might have had this on your mind anyway. Toby, said Jack, turning towards the deserted shore with a ghastly attempt at lightness, when his aching eyes could no longer see anything on the lake. You said that we could not be worse off when the barge left us. Don't you wish you had held your tongue now? And I love Toby's reply. It was a thoughtless thing to say. It smacked of hubris, of insolent security. Jack's entirely right. And Toby clearly had been tempting fate. And of course, we now get to think, this sounds like another low point. Just how much worse can it get? They can't lie down to sleep because where they are, the roots of the tree kind of force them to sit up. So they crouch together, shivering with cold, keeping each other warm, lapsing into a kind of stunned unconsciousness. But when they wake, they smell smoke and they hear the noise of a ritual, and that draws them to another encampment of Indians, a different tribe. And although they are treated roughly, because we learn that European men smell bad to these tribes, they are allowed in the canoes, and they get to travel northwards across the lake to a second encampment. And by the way, I get reminded here of Peter Palafox and the Cantonese merchants describing Europeans with sort of disgust.
Right.
Europeans, from the Indians' point of view, they would not allow any of these blasphemous, smelly, unlucky lepers into their wigwam. And again, O'Brien addresses the audience and asks us, who would exactly?
Right. Can't you see their point of view? I love that. Well, again, Toby and Jack have the Indians, but they still have to find their own food. And that night, they actually sleep pretty well, and they eat pretty well. They've kind of found a little sheltered place that has a little bit of greens left. They start to pick up the local rituals. They start to realize, and this is Toby kind of as a naturalist and kind of a observer of society. He's saying, you notice they're doing this, we need to do that and everything. And part of that includes not throwing limpet shells back into the lake.
Yeah.
And so they start kind of taking the shells and doing the thing to appease whatever spirits are there. And that actually ends up saving Jack's life, because one Indian who sees them trying to imitate the rituals sees Jack about to eat some berries and slaps them out of his hand and motions, it kind of pantomimes dying in agony. So yeah, this is nice. And Toby, thank God, has this seeming ability to pick up cultures, languages, and everything else. It sounds a little bit like our Stephen here.
Yeah.
Eventually, they take to the sea all together, and they meet up with the other Indians and Captain Sheep and Campbell and Hamilton. And once more, Jack and Toby are there sticking with the captain and Campbell. But Hamilton now decides that he's really tired of the cacique's insolent rule, and he stays on shore to wait for another boat. And this is one of the scenes where I really wanted so many times in this to go say, I've got to go get Byron's book where he's written this all down. And I kind of want to say, wow, who decides, you know what? I don't like you. I'm just staying here. But, well done, Hamilton.
And yet another epic journey that is takes more time than the chapter really has room for. So we skip ahead. It takes more than a month to get to Chiloé. More than a month of miles and miles and miles of water, often angry, always cold. They're making progress, but it's horrible progress. The text says, every evening, the feverish search along the darkening shore for something to eat, anything, dead or alive, to take the extreme anguish from their hunger. And the captain is physically and mentally falling apart, legs hideously swollen as if with scurvy, but his body desperately thin. He no longer knows the names of Jack and Toby. He's lying in the bottom of the canoe, more or less delirious. And Jack and Toby in this final, well, maybe not final, in this chapter of their journey, dig in and survive together. We finally get to a cape and a crossing, which seems more desperate than anything that's come before. Very strong wind, roaring sea. The canoe splits. So they're in this canoe in a storm, and it's coming apart around them, and they bail and paddle. The snow comes hissing down. They see surf ahead in the darkness. The cacique says, I'm a strong swimmer, take me there. directly to the shore, which is going to probably kill everybody. Jack disobeys a direct order for the first time, plucked the cacique from his place, it says, struck him into the bottom of the canoe, kicked him down, and steered along the coast until they found smooth water behind a reef so that they could run ashore safely on the snow-covered coast of Chiloé.
Yay!
And that's the moment. That's the moment where we all go, yay, they've made it. Oh, they've made it somewhere. And next, we're at a wonderful dinner. They're with the villagers of Chiloé. They're in at least partial civilization. The villagers take them in. There's food. There's a dinner, a very funny, charming dinner scene, very Aubrey-Maturin-esque. It seems endless. All these rounds of food are coming their way. And this really, really great last paragraph. Toby can't forget the fact that he's been starved for so long. He's on the edge of sleep, and he murmurs aloud that it's okay. I've got 3/4 of a duck in reserve under my pillow.
Wow.
I'm like, we're about to enter chapter 14. I'm going to say the last 3 chapters I found really, really hard going. And we'll maybe talk at the end about what that means for the story. If you as a listener have found chapters up to and including 13 hard going, I guess one thing we can say, which is a slight spoiler, chapter 14 is glorious.
Right.
Absolutely glorious. Not only for the happy situation, but for all of the nice, upbeat, funny, quirky, humorous O'Brien writing comes absolutely flooding back in chapter 14. Take us into it, my friend.
Oh, and thank goodness it does. So we open with a classic O'Brien opening, the blinding white glare of the sun beating down on the Plaza Real in Santiago. And there's this great O'Brien description of the light and the heat and the color and the movement, the diversity. And we kind of turn the corner into a broad, silent street so lined with trees that one walked in a green shade. Oh my gosh, what a glaring difference to what these guys have been through here. And we meet this expatriate Scotsman, Dr. Ged, an expatriate Scot and cactus expert, as his friend, a government official, Don Juan de la Mansas, finds out to his chagrin here. We hear through them of the surrender of the remnants of the Wager's crew, their imprisonment, their release, their progress through the towns, multiple towns leading to Valparaiso. And we hear of Toby's doings, curing people, using their imaginations and getting into a little bit of hot water with the Inquisition here. We also hear a little bit about Jack saying something about not kissing the image of a saint and thereby apparently bringing on an immediate earthquake and that also attracting the attention of the Inquisition. And then we hear of Captain Cheap and Mr. Hamilton, who as commissioned officers are coming to Santiago while Jack, Toby, and Campbell remain in Valparaiso.
Right. And this is all sounding quite civilized and shore-like. Not everybody likes having these guys around, though, so they're not going to stay there. The governor finds a way to get rid of them, sends them to Santiago as free parcels in the care of a muleteer by the name of Pedro. And compared to all of the other journeys that they've gone so far, this is really not too terrible. They manage to make themselves useful. The muleteer offers them permanent jobs. It's all very charming. They have a nice time. And meanwhile, in Santiago, they are eventually settled with this guy, Dr. Ged, whose housekeeper, Paquita, sees in them her mission in life to fulfilled. She wants to find some men who will eat all the food that she wants to cook. And good news, these men really want to eat. Amidst all this kind of bucolic eating, they get some news of the rest of the squadron of Anson. They get an invitation to eat dinner with the local governor, Don Jose. That's an invitation that sends them into a panic because they're so poor that they can't afford the right kind of fancy clothing. And Mike, we've talked a couple of times already in this book about how O'Brien kind of addresses the reader a bit and breaks the fourth wall. And he does it again here really noticeably. It really kind of jarred on me. He says, even in this century, and I think he means the 20th century, even in this century when clothes mean comparatively little, it is very disagreeable to find oneself in an ordinary jacket when everybody else is in tails. Like, it's really odd. It stands out as the kind of a moment when O'Brien is addressing the reader as kind of 20th century contemporaries and owning up to the fact that this is not a contemporary account written by a fictional contemporary narrator. Anyhow, Jack meets up with a very obliging Spanish gentleman whose mother and sister had been taken by the centurion, but had been treated so nicely. They'd expected to be murdered, but Commodore Anson had turned his officers out of their quarters to make rooms for these Spanish prisoners. This guy's sister had told him stories of how Don Augusto Keppel, Don Guillermo Ransom, Don Pedro Palafox, our friends and characters from the Golden Ocean, had taught her to knit and sent her ashore with a tame penguin. What's not to like?
Right.
In appreciation, this very, very generous Spanish gentleman gives Jack and Toby 2,000 pieces of 8. It takes a while for Toby to twig what that really means, but they can now... They're set for life, really. They can buy clothes. They can eat at the governor's palace. But for a couple of other circumstances, they might have stayed there forever. And Mike, we are into the last chapter now. Help us out with chapter 15.
Oh, you bet, Ian. Well, Jack and Tobias are pretty optimistic here. They're always talking about making plans for when they are exchanged, traded back to the country for comparable Spanish midshipmen, prisoners of war exchange. Time goes on, however, and they start to acclimate to Chile, the food, the daily routine, the language. Toby is applying himself. He's really kind of getting into this. He's learning so much. But Jack, really kind of sinks into dissipation. He is at parties. He's drinking late nights. And this is another Aubrey-Maturin alert.
Yeah.
It is character Jack we see. Now, Tobias applies himself perhaps too assiduously to Dr. Eliot's theories of healing. And, his quackery, if you will, on one patient smells a little bit too much like magic to the Inquisition. They had been interested before, and now, O'Brien writes, he came so close to the stake that he smelt of singeing for weeks after. And Dr. Gedd suggests that Toby should go stay out of town and suggests that he take Jack with him in the hopes of changing this poor fibberty-gibberty loon into a more serious sort of person. Amen to that.
Wow, yeah, but no hope in the short term, because guess what? Another Aubrey-Maturin little alert here. This Jack, both his trouble and his salvation is the fair sex. And he gets to know the governor's daughter, a young lady by the name of Louisa. She gets to have a bit of a taste of his charm. She falls madly in love with him. Don Jose finds this out. First of all, he wants to send Jack off to the block to be executed. Instead, he thinks of a smarter way to deal with this. He has connections. He has interest, the kind of interest that Jack talked about before. He has interest with the local Spanish authorities, arranged for Jack and Toby to be whisked away via a French ship. So all of this, when we get exchanged, all of a sudden becomes now we are exchanged. They've exchanged their freedom for the governor's peace of mind regarding his daughter. And they're aboard this French ship, the Lys. I think that's how you pronounce it. And the Englishmen aboard the ship here, including also, by the way, Captain Cheap and Mr. Hamilton, find themselves wafted in the general direction of England. And by the way, this is a very comedy version of a French ship. It's funny because they're all very democratic and they talk to each other and they argue and bicker a lot, which of course is another little reflection of another way that, authority can be diluted when you all just get to kind of yakking with each other. It's a sort of comedy pastiche of lazy, argumentative, continental French who can't sail. Not really the same as the image that we get of the French Navy in the Aubrey-Maturin books. So this ship is pretty stout. She can stand up to bad weather, but she's a bit of a seagoing pig. She's slow. No matter what the wind, she wallows around. She springs a leak, goes back to Valparaiso, fixes the leak, goes around the Horn, finally, in late season snowstorms. And one final forgetting moment, they forgot the water. There's literally this exchange between the captain and the first lieutenant, known as the second captain. You have forgotten the water. Son of a dog. Very funny. And now they have a crew of argumentative, non-seagoing Frenchmen and English prisoners of war, and they're all down to short rations of water.
And in order to get some water, they bear away for the Caribbean. And it's funny, they were all talking about should they do this, and Cheap is one of the ones thinking, there could be a lot of English ships up there. You're going, yes, I think you should. I think that would be a great place to find water. Well, they find Tobago, bear away for Martinique, miss it, but manage to find Puerto Rico. Finally watered, they brave the channel leading to Hispaniola And there, floating right under their noses, is a British beef barrel, a very fresh British beef barrel. The French don't notice it, nor do they notice the British man-of-war coming up on them as they coast through a small sea dominated by the British Navy. The Englishmen notice it and kind of hold their breath, kind of doing everything they can to distract all the French officers as this British ship, their Deliverance, sails 3 miles to their 2. Now, the French, as night is falling, are as ready to surrender as the English are to be rescued. But with the nightfall, it doesn't happen because the next morning, the Caribbean is as empty as the new-made sea on the first day of the world. So, Ian, as you say, all get good, but a little comedy get what? There's all right. Where'd they go?
At this point, I kind of wanted to slap my head and go, "Come on, this is chapter 15, and we've been through a lot. Can we not just have a kink-free page or two here?" But no, and do you know what? That's not the last kink. They do get to finish their journey across the Atlantic, even only as far as Brest. And they're in a French convoy. And I love this remark from O'Brien. Ships that behave perfectly well alone become overexcited in a crowd. So there are all these kind of entanglements and alarms. It's all a bit of a farce amongst the French fleet here. There's a long stay in France. And finally, a journey to England aboard a Dutch sort of coasting ship, a Dogger, that seems to feel that the wind and tide will not serve. So with one final twist, the Dogger says, I'm not taking you to England. We're going to go to the Netherlands instead. And finally, as they're heading into the lowlands, Jack spots a man-of-war on patrol, manages to slow down this Dutch coasting ship and attract attention from the English ship by letting go of the Dogger's sheets. The English ship catches up with them. Jack shouts across. He recognizes the ship. It's HMS Squirrel, on which he has served. And if you remember Dick Perm from the press gang at the beginning of the story, he's on board. A bit like Henich Dundas, who's always there in the last chapter of an Aubrey-Maturin book, and says he'll carry them into Dover. Jack misses the chance to cuddle the soil of the land of his birth when he does finally get on shore, because it's a mud-inducing rainstorm, because we haven't had enough rain yet in this story. But he is super glad to come on shore. He and Toby are poverty-stricken. They're overloaded with all Toby's scientific burdens, but they are afire now to get to London and get to the Admiralty.
Yeah, that sounds like our other Jack as well. Well, the locals are having a hard time with Jack and Toby because they're dressed all in their French fashions and ponchos, and they seem like strange beings from another world. And they don't endear themselves to the toll keepers either, because they've spent all their money kind of tipping the people getting ashore and helping get a chase so that the Captain Sheep, can get back. And they're left without money. So they're riding, fast through their toll booths, making their way towards London. And nothing goes smoothly. Still, they get to Jack's London house. The family's not in residence. It's all closed up. They go down the street, get the tailor's wife to pay the post-chase fee. And finally, they track down his sister and cousin. They're at the home of Lady Carlisle. And Toby turns pale. He's worried, oh my gosh, has Georgiana married Carlisle? But no, he's married Isabella instead, Jack's sister. Toby says he delights in seeing Isabella and wonders whether Georgiana might be there. Jack is a little bit more interested in supper being there. And, they knock on the door in their outfits and the porter is turning them away. And then Lord Carlisle comes and still doesn't recognize him and is about to turn them away. But Isabella spots them and recognizes her brother. So as Jack is kind of hauled off with his sister, Tobias gets pulled into a living room conversation with the Dowager Lady Carlisle and a friend of hers. And the Dowager lady introduces Tobias as somebody who's been recently traveling. I guess she's looking at the way he's dressed. And they get in this long conversation about traveling, and they're disappointed to hear that he's been traveling by sea. Nothing to see by sea, better to travel by land. However, traveling by land can be dangerous. A cousin once lost a wheel in his chariot. Something like that would never happen at sea. The Tower of Pisa could fall on you. They're pickpockets. And a heavy gentleman, kind of overhearing all this behind him, says, no man will be a sailor who has contrivance enough to get himself into a jail. for being in a ship is being in a jail with a chance of being drowned. I kind of thought, yeah, maybe some people would say yes to that.
I think so. So here we go. Finally, Toby sees Georgiana walk in. There are two suitors by her sides, but Toby is right there. "Ha! Georgiana, my dear," he cried, starting up and throwing down a little round table and two gilt chairs. "There you are at last. How very, very happy I am to see you," he said, kissing her heartily. The Duke, one of the suitors, turned red with anger. The knight, the other suitor, grew pale with fury. "Come," he said, taking her by the hand and leading her to a distant sofa. "Come and sit by me, and let us talk of bats."
Ooh.
The end of The Unknown Shore by Patrick O'Brian.
Wow.
Oh, Mike, so if any of our listeners are still with us, it's been a long old episode. Right. We're so glad that you stuck with it. We've really, really enjoyed this. What do you think, Mike? What are your thoughts on this? Maybe coming straight after the Golden Ocean. It's quite a different proposition, isn't it?
Well, it is. And I think, I love this. And I think perhaps part of it was the contrast effect with the Golden Ocean, too. I mean, I like the Golden Ocean, but I really love this. And actually, I thought this made the Golden Ocean better,
Yeah.
And I just couldn't help, in addition to all the good things about this book in and of itself, I was just amazed at how many of the underpinnings of Aubrey-Maturin O'Brien's already specced out, especially when you throw in the Irishness from the Golden Ocean a decade or more ahead of time when he was writing these.
Yeah. And it's we haven't had time in one episode to talk about all of the desperate twists and turns, all of the terrible luck. And lots of this apparently quite realistic. O'Brien seems to have read Lord Byron's or Jack Byron's account. Jack Byron's account is sort of believed to be reasonably even-handed because at least it, in the historical record, considered in a slightly positive light the case for Captain Cheap being kind of vindicated. But still, it's grim. Things happen. There's a horrible scene where one Indian kills his child for spilling their fishing haul back into the water. All of the really graphic violence. It's certainly far from being a young person's adventure book. And as you said, Mike, O'Brien kind of drops some hints in a couple of places that this is meant to be more of a grown-up story. I'm going to be honest and say, not just because they were grim, but I found those chapters hardest to read because I don't think the grimness was serving the kind of storytelling purpose that you find in Patrick O'Brian books. It turned it into an adventure story and a really, really exciting and well-told adventure story. I had no problem continuing. But like I said, I was so happy when we got to chapter 14 because suddenly all of the light and the joy and the interaction and kind of the society and friendship was all back again. Oh, and by the way, food. And I felt like I'd had a really hard time living in a part of the book that had none of those O'Brien bits in them, and I was really, really happy to get to chapter 14 just to show what a delight it is to read him. So it's funny, an adventure story wrapped in amongst actually a really pretty fully developed piece of Patrick O'Brienism, everything except for Boccherini. Right.
I know if we'd had Boccherini, we would have had everything. I'm thinking about naming a new dog Boccherini, by the way. But we'll let you go with Mozart. But one of the things I loved too, Ian, was this. I think we didn't talk about it here, but in the very beginning, Toby gets this note from Georgiana about, oh my dear, I will take care of your bat. And now here we close it at the end, with these two grown-ups years later and so changed. Let us talk of bats. And I think some readers were, like, oh my gosh, how could you end a story like this with that? I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So I'm just going to kind of wrap up my remarks by saying I'm definitely coming back to this one. I'll be including it into my circumnavigations. And I'm really looking forward to going back to the Golden Ocean with this one in mind.
Oh, fantastic. So, Mike, it's been really, really fun to dip back into these, as you say, to hear all of the proto Aubrey-Maturinisms, but also to get some of that great writing. I think to be reminded as well of this really important story, the Anson story.
Yeah.
And to be reminded that this was just one shot in O'Brien's locker, to use a naval metaphor. Writing historical naval fiction was one thing that he tried, and he put it down and did many, many other things before coming back to it. And it just reminds me of the breadth of the skill and the depth of his talent. So, Mike, I think next week we're going to spend some time reliving the really fabulous interview we had a few weeks ago with biographer Dean King, talking about Patrick O'Brian, A Life Revealed, and Dean King's own appreciation for O'Brien's work and his own discoveries about the sum of the reality of the life and the work and the flaws of the man that we've been talking about. And then I think it's going to be back to the one remaining bit of O'Brian writings that we have yet to talk about, and that's going to be in a couple of weeks' time. What people sometimes call 21, the incomplete final adventure of Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin. So, Mike, what do you say? Next week, to talking just for an hour or two more about this fabulous Patrick O'Brian.
With all my heart. Finishes, as O'Brien writes, with all the condensation of a with all the condens. He's all wet at the end. There you go, Sam. And he finishes with all the condescension